and welcome to Kitchen Underground. I'm Audrey, and today I'll be showing you how to make a roasted winter vegetable salad. There's a few different components in this salad, so let's go over them really quickly. First, the vegetables that we're going to be roasting are Brussels sprouts, butternut squash, and cauliflower. To do this, I like to just cut them up and toss them in olive oil and sea salt and do it all in the same pan, but we'll get to that a little bit later. First, we're going to have Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts are in the cabbage family, and as you can see, they kind of look like a mini cabbage. And not only are they delicious, but they have so many different health benefits. Not only does it fight cancer, but it has high levels of vitamin K, A, and C. I'm also going to use a little bit of Tuscan kale in it, just to add a little bit of raw crunch since we'll be roasting the rest of the vegetables. Next, we're going to be making the dressing out of horseradish, a little bit of shallot and garlic, apple cider vinegar, and some honey to bring out a little bit of sweetness. To top off the salad, we're going to add some pumpkin seeds and pomegranate. It's going to be delicious. I think we're ready to go, so let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is wash and cut the Brussels sprouts. For this salad, I use about 3 cups of chopped up Brussels sprouts. Before we even begin to cut up our vegetables, we're going to want to preheat the oven. Today, to roast these vegetables, we're going to set the oven to 400 degrees and cook them for about 30 minutes. To save a few dishes, I like to just cut the Brussels sprouts and put them directly in the pan, and that's where I'll toss them with a little bit of olive oil and sea salt. Now, Brussels sprouts are kind of uniform in size, but depending on if they're a little bit smaller or bigger, I'll either half them or cut them in quarters. You can see it's a little bit of a difference, so we want them to cook even, and that's why we cut them a little bit differently. To begin, I'm going to cut the bottom off and take off a few of the outer leaves. Then, now that you have that flat surface, set it down and cut it in half. And since this is bigger, I'm going to cut it in quarters. And then just toss it on the pan. In order to make the process go a little bit faster, it's nice to just cut the bottom off of all of them. And do one step at a time, so you're not dropping your knife constantly. In order not to waste the leaves that we're removing from the Brussels sprouts, we're going to save them and wash them with the kale, and then we'll add them into the salad raw. This will add a lot more texture and a little bit more crunch and difference of flavor. Next up, we have the cauliflower. Now, when picking a cauliflower, you want to make sure that it's a nice creamy white color and that there's not really any marks or blemishes on it. That means that it's like fresh, and you want it to be firm so that it's not going bad. We're going to use about half a large cauliflower or 1 small head of cauliflower. Now this one that I chose is pretty big, so I'm just going to cut it in half. Okay. Now, as you can see, there's a stem that runs right down the middle, and I'm going to use a lot of this, but I'm going to cut out the middle portion. I'm just going to run my knife in a triangle shape. So it still holds together, but it cuts out the bottom portion. And now we can just pop that part right out. Now we want to give the cauliflower a thorough rinse. Next, I'm just going to break up the florets a little bit, and then use my knife to cut them in, about the same size as the Brussels sprouts, so it cooks the same. And I don't like to cut all the way through. I like to kind of break it with my knife so that you keep the shape of the florets. So kind of run it down the middle of the stem and then turn your knife. And then you can kind of go like that. Now this tray is getting a little bit full, and we don't want the vegetables on top of one another, otherwise they won't cook evenly, or cook at all for that matter. So we're going to put the butternut squash in a separate pan, and for this one we're going to drizzle about a tablespoon or 2 of olive oil and a few shakes of sea salt on there. I don't generally measure my ingredients, so I like to just go by a capful or 2, which I think is about a tablespoon. Next, I like to use Himalayan sea salt, because it's not like regular table salt, it retains all the minerals, so it's actually really good for you. Himalayan sea salt isn't as salty as your regular table salt, so you need a little bit more, but it's not going to taste overly salty. Just give it a good toss with your hands. Make sure everything's nice and coated. And before sticking it in the oven, I like to just taste one of the leaves of Brussels sprouts or a piece of cauliflower to make sure all the flavors are there, it's salty enough, not too salty. Otherwise, you can add a few more vegetables to even out the flavors. So, it's tasting pretty good. And remember, it doesn't have to be overly flavorful because we're gonna add a dressing to it. We're gonna stick this in the oven on the middle rack for about 30 minutes at 400 degrees. Next up, we have our butternut squash. To cook it, we're gonna cut the top off, then cut it in half and peel it. This just makes it easier to work with when you cut it in half. We're gonna use our peeler, or if you don't have one, you can simply run the blade of your knife down it. But if you do, just take the peeler and go like that. You might need to go over it a few times just to get the whole peel off. You're just gonna peel all the way around until all of the skin is off. Then we're gonna move over to the second half. I happen to love butternut squash, but you can also sub in a variety of different things. You could use sweet potatoes if you don't have that, or a different type of squash like delicata or kombucha. You really want to remove the skin until you can really see the orange flesh coming through. The sweet flavor of the butternut squash is a powerhouse of nutrients as well. It contains phytonutrients, B complex, and vitamin A. Now that we have the squash peeled, we're gonna cut the bottom half. Now we're gonna scrape out the seeds with a spoon and then dice it up. Once that's all scraped out, we're just gonna cut off the very end where the bottom is, the base is. Okay, we're gonna cut this, first of all, in lengthwise strips, trying to be as even as possible. Next, we're gonna almost cut them like matchsticks. That's the idea here. Next, we're gonna rotate it again and cube it. As even as you can get it. And again, we're just gonna put the butternut squash directly on the roasting sheet. So the bottom half of the butternut squash is a little trickier because it's such an odd shape. You have the scooped out middle and it's a little bit round like a half moon. So I like to kind of hold it on an angle and then cut it, rotating my knife with the squash. That way you get the same matchstick shape. It looks kind of like slices of cantaloupe. And you can see they're pretty even, kind of like a sliver of a moon. So again with the butternut squash, we're just gonna do a few tablespoons of olive oil and a little bit of Himalayan sea salt. Now we're gonna pop this in the oven for about 30 minutes as well. We can put it on the top shelf and then rotate it with the cauliflower and Brussels sprouts as we go. While our vegetables are roasting, we're gonna start making our dressing. For this recipe, we're gonna use about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of horseradish. It's about 2 tablespoons once it's all chopped up. First off, we're just gonna give it a good rinse. Now, I like to just take off the skin with a knife. You can also peel it as close to it as you can, so you're not wasting any of the root. In little tiny matchsticks. Line them up. Now we're gonna throw it in our blender. So it's been about 15 minutes since our Brussels sprouts and cauliflower have been in. So we're just gonna check it, maybe give it a little toss with the spatula. You can see how it's starting to caramelize and get a little bit crispy on top. And you don't want to overcook this because it's for a salad, so you want it to still have a little bit of crunch. Those are getting really close, so let's stick it in for about another 10-15 minutes. Next, we're going to put in 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar, 1/4 cup of cold water, 1 tablespoon each of honey and Dijon mustard, and we're going to do about 1/2 teaspoon of sea salt, but we're going to just put a little bit in and taste it at the end and then adjust the flavoring. So we're going to stick this in the blender, and then after it's all blended, these ingredients, we're going to slowly add 1/4 cup of olive oil. The reason we don't add it in the beginning is because we want it to emulsify, otherwise the dressing is going to separate once it's all done. Now, we're gonna add in our olive oil. So I'm gonna get it going on just like a low speed and drizzle it in very slowly. That's a nice roasted golden brown color. We're just gonna set these aside and let them cool a little bit. You can serve the salad warm, but I like it more at room temperature. Even the next day, it's great. Next, we're gonna cut and wash the kale. I like to use even the stem of the dino kale because it has an actually sweet, crunchy flavor. For this, I don't really like it completely shredded. More of like an inch thick. We're gonna put it in our salad spinner. I like to run it under cold water and let it kind of soak in it to pull the dirt away. And also, remember those reserved Brussels sprout leaves? We're just gonna throw them right in. Next, we're gonna take the seeds out of our pomegranate. We're just gonna cut the top off of it and then cut it in half. Now, by running a cold stream of water over the pomegranate, it helps to loosen the seeds and they just kind of pop right out. And just open it up. And the seeds should just start popping out. Now that we have those all removed, we're gonna set them aside and let the water drip out a little bit because we don't want it in the salad. And let's check on our squash while we're at it. Now you can see it's starting to blister a little bit on top, so we're just gonna flip them over and let the other side get a little bit more cooked. Now you can see the dino kale is looking a lot greener and a lot more clean, so I think it's ready to be dried. And give it a good spin. So the recipe for the dressing makes exactly 1 cup of dressing, which should be just the right amount for the salad. I think our squash is ready. You can see it has a nice blistered look and is kind of soft to the touch but not mushy. We're gonna set this aside now, let it cool down a little bit, and then put our salad all together. In the meantime, you can kind of clean up, or if you're making dessert, it's always a great time to do that, or get the rest of the meal together. For this dinner, I also like to make a little bit of steamed quinoa, some maybe seared salmon, if you want a little extra protein. Now that we have everything prepped and ready to go, we're just gonna combine it all in our bowl. First, we're gonna put down our greens. We might not need all of these, we can always save them. Next, we're gonna grab our roasted vegetables and put them in. Just put them all in. You can see how beautiful all the colors are. Alright, next we're gonna put in our pomegranate. And I like to top it off with a ½ cup of pumpkin seeds. And we've got our dressing. This dressing is also really good if you eat dairy. If you add a little bit of Parmesan cheese or creme fraiche, it really makes it a little bit smoother. But, you know, the horseradish is great as it is. Gonna give it a good toss. This salad is so beautiful, not only because of all the different colors, but because of all the different flavors and textures. It's got the crunch of the raw kale and Brussels sprouts, and the creaminess of the roasted vegetables, as well as that juicy, bright flavor of the pomegranate. And there you go, delicious and nutritious. Join me again next time at Kitchen Underground, or check me out on my blog, kitchenunderground.com.